The iron gates of Ashryn Fortress groaned open beneath the weight of dusk. Aurelia Venn walked between two guards, her black mourning veil stirring in the cold mountain wind. For 2 years the village had called her cursed. After her husband Soren died defending the border pass, the fields began to wither and the river ran thin. When sickness returned and the winter stores failed, the elders made their decision. They bound her wrists with harvest cord and sent her as tribute to the Dragon King, hoping her death would quiet the old pact that had haunted their lands since the last war. Aurelia kept her head high. She had already buried the only man she loved. She would not beg for mercy she no longer believed existed. The great hall was colder than the night outside. Black stone walls rose into darkness, carved with runes that had long lost their light. At the far end, on a throne of obsidian and bone, sat Dragon King Kaelor Ashryn, tall and broad-shouldered, with storm-gray eyes and a long burn scar running from his left temple down across his cheek. He looked like a man who had survived too many wars. An iron chain lay across his lap, the leash of Morvath, the last war dragon, who had not spoken or moved from its tower in years. Lord Orvek Thane stood at the king's right. "The village sends this woman as punishment tribute," Orvek announced. "They say she carries misfortune. She is to be judged at dawn." Kaelor's gaze moved slowly over Aurelia. His voice was low and rough. "Another widow. Another offering meant to die before sunrise." Aurelia met his eyes without lowering hers. "If they promised you my death would save them, ask what proof they sent with me," she said quietly. "They bound my wrists with harvest cord, not royal chains. They did not even send the old pact page they claimed demanded blood." A flicker of something crossed Kaelor's face. Before he could speak, Orvek stepped forward. "The pact is old and clear, Your Majesty. A widow from the cursed line must be offered when famine returns. The village has kept its side." Aurelia turned her head slightly toward Orvek. "Then why did the fields begin dying the season before my husband fell? And why was the village well sealed the same night he died?" Orvek's eyes narrowed. For half a breath, his gaze dropped to the old scar across her palm, the mark she had carried since the night Soren died. The scar seemed to warm beneath her skin. Orvek looked away too quickly. Kaelor noticed the exchange. His fingers tightened around the iron chain across his lap. "Take her to the eastern tower," he ordered. "No one is to touch her before dawn. I will decide her fate myself." The guards led Aurelia away. As they passed beneath the high arch leading to the tower stairs, a deep grinding sound rolled through the stone above them, the sound of heavy chains shifting after years of silence. In the highest tower, the burned war dragon Morvath opened its golden eyes for the first time in a decade, its massive, scarred body pressed against the iron restraints. A low, ancient voice rumbled through the fortress like distant thunder. "Ashbond." The word moved through the walls like heat through ice. In the eastern tower cell, the guards locked the heavy door behind Aurelia and left her in darkness. She stood still, listening. The scar on her palm pulsed with a slow, ember-like warmth she had not felt since the night Soren died. High above, Morvath pulled against its chains. "Ashbond." The repeated title pulled dust from the ceiling, and the scar in Aurelia's palm contracted into a ring of ember light. Kaelor Ashryn was still in the great hall when the voice reached him. The iron chain across his lap suddenly tightened on its own. The burn scar on his face flared with sudden heat, sharp enough to make his vision blur for one heartbeat. He rose slowly, eyes lifting toward the chain tower. Lord Orvek Thane stepped forward at once, his voice low and urgent. "Your Majesty, the dragon has not spoken in years. If it has mistaken her for an ash bond bearer, keeping her here may wake the war oath buried with him." Judgment cannot wait until dawn. Kaelor's gaze shifted to him. You knew the title. Orvek's face remained composed, but his next breath came a fraction too late. I know only what the sealed pact permits the king's advisor to know. Kaelor studied him for a moment longer, then turned his attention back to the tower. Morvath may have forgotten flight and speech, he said quietly. He has never mistaken an oath. He looked at the iron chain in his hand, then gave the order. Open the chain tower. I will speak with Morvath myself. Lord Orvek Thane's voice tightened. Your Majesty, the pact forbids it. Kaelor's voice dropped lower, carrying the weight of a decision already made. Then the pact will have to break. High above them, Morvath pressed one burning golden eye close to the cold stone, as if it could see straight through the wall to the woman locked in the eastern cell below. The scar in Aurelia's palm flared bright enough to cast ember light across the floor. On the other side of the stone, every buried rune around Morvath's chains began to glow with the same slow, living light. The first key broke before the guard could finish turning it. The man stared at the snapped metal in his hand, then looked up at the massive iron door of the chain tower. A second guard tried another key from the royal ring. It slid in halfway before stopping with a harsh grinding sound that echoed down the corridor. Lord Orvek Thane stood a short distance away, watching with folded arms. The mechanisms are old, he said. Forcing them now may bring the entire upper structure down. Kaelor Ashryn stood at the base of the stairs, the iron chain still wrapped around his fist. The burn scar on his face had not stopped throbbing since Morvath first spoke. Bring the old keys from the vault, he ordered, the ones sealed with my father's mark. Orvek's expression did not change, but his answer came a fraction too quickly. Those keys were destroyed after the last war. Kaelor turned his head. Were they? Before Orvek could reply, a deep, vibrating sound rolled down from above. It was not Morvath's voice. It was the sound of one of the largest chains being dragged across stone, slow and deliberate. Every guard instinctively stepped back. Kaelor looked up at the tower. He is not striking the outer wall, he said. He is pulling toward the lower stair. Orvek Thane stepped forward. Your Majesty, the dragon has not spoken in years. If it has mistaken the woman for an ash bond bearer, keeping her here may wake the war oath buried with him. She should be moved before the tower is forced open. Kaelor studied him for a moment. You knew the title, he said quietly. You knew what it would do to Morvath, yet you were ready to judge her before dawn under a pact the village did not even bring proof of. Orvek met his gaze steadily. The village brought no pact page, Kaelor continued. Who gave you authority to accept its sentence? Orvek's voice remained calm. Your father's seal authorized the famine clause long before you inherited the throne. I enforce the law your crown still carries. Kaelor did not look away. In the eastern tower cell below, Aurelia stood near the narrow window. The ring of ember light around the scar on her palm had grown brighter. Each time the chains moved above, the light tightened around the same incomplete curve in her mark. She pressed her palm flat against the cold stone wall. Morvath, she said quietly. The ember ring flared once. For a brief moment, the warmth inside the scar spread through her entire hand, steady and deliberate, as if something on the other side had answered. High above, the sound of chains dragging across stone suddenly stopped. Kaelor was still staring at Orvek when the silence reached them. Orvek's eyes flicked upward for half a second before returning to the king. In her cell, Aurelia slowly pulled her hand away from the wall. The ember light had not faded. Instead it moved, tracing the old lines of the scar with slow, careful strokes. The incomplete curve began to fill. When the light finally settled, a clear shape remained in the center of her palm. It was a small, broken clasp, the same clasp Soren had worn on the night he died. Aurelia stared at the symbol, her breath caught in her throat. She had seen it only once before, when she had cleaned his body. At the time, she thought it was nothing more than a simple fastening on his traveling cloak. Now she understood it had never been ordinary. The clasp had hidden something, and whatever it was, Morvath had just recognized it. Aurelia stood in the center of the cell, staring at her palm. The ember light had faded, but the symbol of the broken clasp remained clearly etched into her skin. She had cleaned Soren's body herself after the soldiers brought him back. At the time, she thought the clasp on his cloak was nothing more than a simple fastening. Now she understood it had never been ordinary. Whatever Soren had hidden in the scar was no longer willing to remain silent. High above, the chain tower had gone quiet. The constant dragging of metal had stopped the moment the symbol appeared. Aurelia did not know whether that meant the dragon was satisfied or waiting. In the corridor outside the chain tower, Kaelor Ashryn stood facing Lord Orvech Thane. The sudden silence from above had done nothing to ease the tension between them. Kaelor spoke first. The dragon stopped without warning. Not because we forced the door. Something reached him before we could open it. Orvech remained composed. Morvath has always responded to the presence of the king. That does not mean we should bring the prisoner any closer. Kaelor studied him for a moment. The village brought no pact page, yet you were ready to accept their sentence. Where is the original famine clause? The one sealed with my father's mark, Orvech answered smoothly. It is kept in the sealed war archive. Only the Dragon King and a dragon witness may open it together. That law has stood since your father's time. Kaelor's voice dropped. Then we will open it together. Until then, you will not approach the archive. At that moment, the guards brought Aurelia up from the eastern tower. She walked steadily, though her wrists were still bound with harvest cord. When she reached the base of the chain tower, her eyes went first to the massive iron door, then to Kaelor. Kaelor looked at the scar on her palm, without needing to ask. The symbol of the broken clasp was still visible. Aurelia met his gaze. Before you open that door, she said quietly, tell me why your advisor recognized the scar in my palm before Morvath ever spoke. Orvech Thane did not move, but Kaelor noticed the slight shift in his stance. Kaelor turned back to her. Morvath recognized it first. The rest we will find out together. He looked up at the iron door. Continue opening the tower. The guards moved forward with new tools. As metal scraped against metal, Aurelia stepped closer to the base of the stairs. She could feel the warmth returning to the scar on her palm, stronger now that she stood directly beneath the chain tower. She looked at Kaelor. If Morvath speaks again, I want to hear everything he says. No one takes me away before that. Kaelor met her eyes for a brief moment, then gave a short nod. Agreed. Orvech's voice sharpened. Your Majesty. The prisoner has no standing to make demands. She is tribute, not a dragon witness. Kaelor turned to him. Then tell me, does the law name Morvath as the witness, or the woman he recognized? Orvech did not answer. High above them, Morvath shifted. The sound of chains moving resumed, slower and more deliberate than before, not the violent pulling from earlier. Kaelor placed a hand on the stone wall. He is listening. Aurelia looked up. The ember light in her scar pulsed once, then steadied. Morvath's voice rolled down through the stone, low and heavy. Soren. The name echoed through the corridor. Aurelia froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Kaelor's burn scar flared sharply across his face. Behind him, Lord Orvech Thane stepped back so sharply that his shoulder struck the wall. The color had drained from his face. High above, every chain went still. The name hung in the air long after Morvath stopped speaking. Zoren. Aurelia felt as if the ground beneath her had shifted. She had spent 2 years believing her husband died protecting the village from raiders. Now the war dragon locked in the highest tower had spoken his name like it was something he had known for years. Her hands trembled slightly. She pressed them together to steady herself, but the scar on her palm still burned with a low, steady heat. Kaelor Ashryn turned slowly to face Lord Orvek Thane. The burn scar across his face was still glowing faintly from the dragon's voice. "You will explain," Kaelor said, his voice low and dangerous. "Why does Morvath know the name of a dead border guard?" Orvek had regained some of his composure, though his shoulder still rested against the wall behind him. He straightened his robes with deliberate calm. "Dragons sometimes speak names from the past when they wake," he said. "It does not mean the name carries meaning. Morvath has been chained for a long time. His mind may no longer be clear." Kaelor took one step toward him. "Morvath has not spoken in 10 years. The first word he chose to say was a title we were ordered to forget. The second word was the name of this woman's husband. Do not insult me by calling it coincidence. Orvek Methis Gaze. I do not know why the dragon spoke that name, Your Majesty, but I know it is dangerous to draw conclusions before we understand what we are dealing with." Aurelia stepped forward. Her voice was quieter than Kaelor's, but steady. "My husband left one night without telling me where he was going. When he came back, he was already dying. The only thing he said was to keep something hidden. He never told me what it was." She looked up at the chained tower. "But Morvath knew him. That means Soren came here." Kaelor glanced at her. For the first time, there was something close to respect in his eyes. Orvek's voice cut in before Kaelor could reply. "Even if the man came to the fortress, it does not change the law. The prisoner has no right to stand before the chained tower. She is tribute, nothing more." Aurelia turned to him. "Then why does your face lose color every time Morvath speaks?" Orvek's eyes flicked to her, cold and sharp. "You are in no position to question me." Kaelor raised a hand, silencing them both. "Enough." He looked up at the massive iron door. The chains had gone still again, but the air around the tower felt heavier than before. "Continue opening the door," he ordered the guards. Slowly. The guards hesitated for only a moment before resuming their work with the locks. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed down the corridor. Aurelia stood quietly, her eyes fixed on the tower. The scar on her palm pulsed in time with each movement of the chains. She could feel it, not just warmth, but a kind of pressure, as if something on the other side was trying to reach through the stone. Kaelor noticed the way she stared at her hand. "Does it hurt?" he asked quietly. Aurelia shook her head. "It feels like it's listening." Kaelor was silent for a moment. "Morvath has never listened to anyone but me," he said. "Not since the day I chained him." Orvek spoke again, his tone carefully measured. "Your Majesty, I must advise against continuing. If the dragon has begun to fixate on the prisoner and her husband's name, forcing the tower open may cause him to break free completely. We still do not know what Ashbond truly means." Kaelor turned to him. "Then we will find out, starting with the War Archive." Orvek's expression tightened. "The archive can only be opened with a dragon witness present. You cannot enter it alone." Kaelor looked at Aurelia. "Then perhaps we already have one." Before Orvek could protest, a deep, vibrating sound came from above. It was not a voice this time. It was the sound of one of the smaller chains snapping. The guards immediately stepped back, weapons drawn. Kaelor's hand tightened around the iron leash he still carried. "Morvath is not trying to escape," he said. "He is trying to reach the lower levels." Aurelia felt the scar in her palm flare sharply. She instinctively pressed her hand against her chest, as if to contain the heat. Kaelor looked at her. "Whatever your husband was involved in," he said, "Morvath remembers it. and he is no longer willing to stay silent about it. High above them, another chain groaned under strain. And this time, when Morvath spoke, his voice was clearer than before. Not a name. A single heavy word that rolled down through the stone like thunder. Open. The word open still echoed through the stone corridor long after Morvath fell silent. Kaelor Ashryn stood motionless, his hand tightening around the iron chain he carried. The burn scar on his face pulsed with a steady heat, matching the rhythm of the dragon's command. For years, Morvath had obeyed only silence. Now the war dragon was giving orders. Lord Orvech Thane was the first to speak. "Your Majesty, you cannot listen to him," he said, his voice sharper than before. "Morvath has been chained for a reason. If you open that door because he commands it, you will lose whatever control remains." Kaelor did not look at him. His eyes stayed on the massive iron door above. "He has not spoken in 10 years," he said quietly, "and the first command he gives is to open the tower. That is not madness, that is intent." Orvech stepped closer. "Intent or not, the risk is too great. We do not know what will happen if he is released. The old pact existed to prevent exactly this." Kaelor finally turned to face him. The old pact also allowed villages to send widows as tribute without proof. It allowed you to accept her death before dawn. I am beginning to wonder how much of that pact was truly meant to protect the kingdom, and how much of it was meant to protect certain people from the truth. Orvech's jaw tightened, but he did not argue further. Aurelia stood a few steps behind them, her bound hands clasped in front of her. The scar on her palm burned hotter than it had all night. Every time Morvath spoke, the heat inside the mark grew stronger, as if the dragon's voice was feeding it. She could feel the broken clasp symbol pulsing against her skin like a second heartbeat. When Kaelor gave the order to continue opening the door, she did not step back. Instead, she moved closer to the base of the tower. The guards hesitated for only a moment before resuming their work. The sound of tools striking metal filled the corridor once more. This time, the resistance from the locks felt weaker, as if something from above was helping push from the other side. Aurelia pressed her scarred palm against the stone wall again. The heat flared, then spread up her arm in a slow wave. She closed her eyes and spoke under her breath, too quietly for the others to hear. "What do you want from me?" There was no answer in words, but the chains above shifted again, this time with less violence. It almost felt like the dragon was listening. Kaelor noticed her standing so close to the wall. He stepped over and spoke in a low voice only she could hear. "You should stay back. We still do not know what will come through that door." Aurelia kept her hand on the stone. "He said my husband's name," she replied. "And now he is telling you to open the tower. I think he has been waiting for someone to listen for a very long time." Kaelor studied her face for a moment. "Your husband came here," he said. It was not a question. Aurelia nodded. "I think he did more than that." Before Kaelor could reply, one of the guards suddenly stepped back from the door. "Your Majesty, the lock just turned on its own." Everyone went still. The heavy iron door let out a deep, groaning sound as the final lock disengaged from within. No one had turned the last key. The mechanism had moved by itself. Orvech Thane's face lost what little color it had left. "Do not open it," he said quickly. "Your Majesty, I beg you. Whatever is on the other side of that door was sealed for a reason. Your father—" Kaelor cut him off. "My father is not here." He looked at the guards. "Stand ready." The guards moved into position on either side of the door, spears raised. Kaelor stepped forward and placed his hand on the cold iron. The burn scar across his face flared once, bright and painful, then settled into a steady glow. He pushed. The massive door began to swing open with a low, grinding sound that vibrated through the stone floor. Cold air rushed out from the tower above, carrying the scent of old metal and something older like ash and dragonfire long since burned out. Aurelia felt the scar on her palm flare so brightly that it cast a faint red glow across the floor in front of her. From the darkness inside the chained tower, a pair of burning golden eyes appeared high above, slowly descending as Morvath began to move downward. Kaelor stood his ground, the iron chain still in his hand. Orvek Thane took another step back, his breathing uneven. And Aurelia, despite everything, did not look away. She had come here expecting to die. Now, she was about to meet the creature that had spoken her husband's name. The chain tower doors stood fully open. Cold air continued to pour out from the darkness above, carrying the heavy scent of old iron and scorched stone. High in the shadows, Morvath's golden eyes descended slowly, growing larger as the massive dragon made its way down the internal stair. Kaelor Ashryn did not move. He stood at the entrance with the iron chain still wrapped around his fist, his posture rigid. The burned scar on his face glowed with a steady light, matching the rhythm of the dragon's approach. Behind him, Lord Orvek Thane had stopped retreating. He now stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the darkness above. Aurelia remained where she was, a few steps to Kaelor's left. The scar on her palm burned so brightly that the red light reflected faintly on the stone floor. She could feel her heartbeat in it. The first thing that became visible was Morvath's head. The war dragon was enormous, even larger than the stories had described. His scales were dark and cracked in many places, marked by old burns that had never fully healed. Two long, curved horns swept back from his skull, and his golden eyes burned with an intensity that made it difficult to look directly at him. He stopped when his head reached the level of the open door. His gaze moved past Kaelor and landed directly on Aurelia. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Morvath's voice rolled out, low and rough, like stone grinding against stone. "You carry it still." Aurelia's throat felt dry. She forced herself to answer. "The scar?" Morvath's eyes narrowed slightly. "The oath." Kaelor's grip on the iron chain tightened. "What oath?" he asked. Morvath did not look at him. His gaze remained on Aurelia. "The one her husband tried to hide from me." Aurelia felt a sharp pain in her chest. She had suspected Soren was involved with the dragon, but hearing it spoken so directly still struck her hard. Kaelor stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Aurelia and the dragon. "Explain." Morvath finally turned his eyes to Kaelor. There was no anger in them, only something old and tired. "Your father bound me after the last war. He took part of my will and sealed it away so I would never again choose my own rider. Soren Venn found what remained of that will. He tried to return it to me, but he was too late." Aurelia's voice came out quieter than she intended. "He died because of this?" Morvath looked at her again. "He died because he refused to give it to the one who wanted to use it." Orvek Thane's voice cut in sharply from behind. "Enough. This is not the time for old stories. The dragon is unstable. We must secure the tower before he does something we cannot undo." Kaelor did not turn around. "You knew," he said coldly. "You knew Soren came here. You knew what he was trying to do." Orvek did not it. "I did what was necessary to keep the war dragons under control," he replied. "Your father understood the danger of letting them choose their own bonds. Soren tried to undo that control. He paid the price for it." Aurelia took a step forward. Her voice was steady, though her hands were shaking. "You had my husband killed." Orvek looked at her without remorse. "I did what had to be done to protect the kingdom." Kaelor's burned scar flared brighter. He turned to face Orvek fully. "You will answer for what you have done," he said, "but not here." He looked back at Morvath. The dragon had not moved. His golden eyes remained fixed on Aurelia. The oath is waking, Morvath rumbled. If you open the rest of the chains, I will remember everything, including who tried to take what was never theirs to claim. Kaelor was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke without looking away from the dragon. Orvek Thane, he said, you are to remain in the fortress under guard until I decide what to do with you. Two guards immediately moved to Orvek's sides. For the first time, the advisor did not resist. He simply stared at Kaelor with cold, unreadable eyes. Kaelor finally turned back to Morvath. I will not release you completely, he said. Not yet, but I will not keep you in the dark either. He looked at Aurelia. You will stay here with me. If Morvath speaks again, I want you to hear it. Aurelia nodded once. High above them, Morvath slowly shifted his weight. One of the remaining chains groaned under the movement. Then the dragon spoke again, his voice lower than before. There is one more thing you should know, King of Ashryn. Kaelor looked up. What is it? Morvath's golden eyes gleamed in the darkness. The one who wanted the oath is not finished. Before anyone could ask what he meant, a deep, distant sound echoed from somewhere far below the fortress, the sound of stone grinding against stone, as if a door that had been sealed for a very long time had just begun to open. The distant grinding sound from below the fortress did not fade. It continued in slow, heavy intervals, like something ancient and unwilling was being forced to move after a long sleep. Kaelor Ashryn stood at the base of the chain tower. His eyes narrowed as he listened. The burn scar on his face still glowed faintly from Morvath's presence. Orvek Thane, now flanked by two guards, spoke with visible urgency. Your Majesty, that sound is coming from the lower levels. You must not go down there. Some doors were sealed for good reason. Kaelor turned to him. You seem to know exactly where it is coming from. Orvek did not answer directly. Some things are better left buried. Your father understood that. Kaelor studied him for a moment, then looked at Aurelia. Come with me, he said. We will see what has woken beneath us. Aurelia nodded without hesitation. The scar on her palm was still warm, and she could feel it reacting to the sound from below. Whatever was happening, it was connected to the mark she carried. Morvath's golden eyes followed them as they moved away from the tower. The dragon did not speak again, but the chains around him shifted restlessly, as if he wanted to follow but could not. Kaelor led Aurelia and a small group of guards down through the fortress. They passed through older corridors that saw little use, the air growing colder and heavier the deeper they went. Torches burned with a dimmer light here, as if the darkness itself resisted them. Orvek was forced to walk with them under guard. He remained silent for most of the descent, but his expression grew increasingly tense with every step. After several minutes, they reached a heavy stone door reinforced with iron bands. Ancient runes were carved across its surface, the same style of runes that marked the chained tower above. Unlike the upper levels, these runes were still faintly glowing with a dull red light. The grinding sound was coming from behind this door. Kaelor placed his hand on the stone. The burn scar on his face flared once in response. This is the entrance to the sealed war archive, he said quietly. Orvek's voice came from behind him, low and strained. Do not open it, please. Kaelor turned to look at him. You said only the Dragon King and a dragon witness could open this place. If that is true, then why are you so afraid of what lies on the other side? Orvek did not answer. Aurelia stepped closer to the door. The scar on her palm grew hotter the nearer she got. She could feel a faint pulling sensation, as if something inside the archive was reaching toward the mark she carried. Kaelor looked at her. Do you feel it? She nodded. It's reacting to the scar. the same way it reacted to Morvath's voice. Kaelor was silent for a few seconds. Then he gave the order. Open it. The guards moved forward and began working on the heavy locks. Unlike the chained tower, these locks did not resist. They turned with surprising ease, as if they had been waiting. As the final lock disengaged, the stone door slowly swung inward. Cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of old parchment, dust, and something metallic. The chamber beyond was large and circular, lined with tall stone shelves filled with sealed scrolls and ancient records. In the center of the room stood a massive stone pedestal, upon which rested a thick, leather-bound book, bound with iron clasps. The book was open, and standing in front of it was a figure. It was a man, cloaked in dark robes, his back turned to them. He did not seem surprised by their arrival. Slowly, he closed the book and turned around. Kaelor's expression hardened the moment he saw the man's face. "Valen," he said coldly. The man smiled faintly. He looked to be in his 50s, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. A thin scar ran across his throat. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty," he said calmly. "I simply needed to retrieve something your father left behind." Orvech Thane had gone completely still. For the first time since Aurelia had met him, he looked genuinely afraid. Kaelor stepped into the archive, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "You were supposed to be dead." Valen tilted his head slightly. "Many things were supposed to remain buried after the last war. Yet here we are." His eyes moved to Aurelia and lingered on her scarred palm. "Ah, so you brought her. How convenient." Aurelia felt a chill run down her spine. There was something deeply wrong about the way this man looked at her. Kaelor's voice was ice. "What do you want, Valen?" The man smiled again, though it did not reach his eyes. "The same thing I wanted 10 years ago," he replied. "The rest of the ash bond." He gestured toward the open book on the pedestal. "And it seems your war dragon has finally decided to give it to me." High above them, in the chained tower, Morvath suddenly let out a low, furious roar that shook the entire fortress. The roar from Morvath echoed through the fortress, causing dust to fall from the ceiling of the war archive. Several scrolls on the high shelves trembled and rolled off their ledges. Kaelor Ashryn kept his eyes on Valen, his hand still resting on the hilt of his sword. "Step away from the book," he ordered. Valen did not move. He glanced up at the ceiling, as if he could see through the stone to the chain tower far above. "Your dragon is angry," he remarked calmly. "He must have realized what I took." Aurelia stared at the man. There was something deeply unsettling about him. Not just his presence in this forbidden place, but the way he spoke about Morvath and the Ash Bond, as if they were things he had every right to claim. "Who are you?" she asked. Valen turned his attention to her, his cold eyes studying the scar on her palm with open interest. "My name is Valen. I served your husband's executioners 10 years ago, though I suppose that makes me sound rather cruel." He smiled faintly. "I prefer to think of myself as someone who understands value, and that mark on your hand is extremely valuable." Kaelor stepped forward, placing himself between Aurelia and Valen. "You said you wanted the rest of the ash bond. Explain." Valen clasped his hands behind his back, completely at ease despite the armed guards and the furious dragon above. "After the last war, your father realized that war dragons were too dangerous if they could choose their own riders. So he created a method to split their will. He took part of Morvath's bond and sealed it away. That piece has been hidden ever since." He looked directly at Aurelia. "Your husband found it. He tried to return it to Morvath, but Orvech and I stopped him. Unfortunately, before he died, Soren managed to hide the remaining fragment inside his wife." Aurelia felt as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs. She had suspected Soren was involved, but hearing it spoken so plainly still hit her hard. Kaelor's voice was low and dangerous. So the mark on her hand is not just a scar, it is part of Morvath. Valen nodded. Precisely. And now that the dragon has begun to wake, the fragment inside her is responding. If I take it, I can control what remains of Morvath's will. The war dragon will become mine to command. Orvik Thane, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke. You are a fool, Valen. Even if you succeed, you cannot control a full war dragon. The pact was made to prevent exactly this kind of ambition. Valen glanced at Orvik with mild disdain. You were always too cautious. That is why you remained an advisor, while I sought real power. Kaelor drew his sword halfway from its sheath. You will not touch her. Valen smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. I do not need to touch her, Your Majesty. I only need to wait. As if on cue, the scar on Aurelia's palm suddenly flared with intense heat. She gasped and clutched her hand to her chest. The broken clasp symbol glowed brightly, and she could feel something inside it being pulled, as if an invisible force was trying to rip the mark out of her skin. Kaelor immediately turned to her. Aurelia. She gritted her teeth against the pain. It feels like something is trying to tear it out. Valen raised one hand. A faint red glow appeared around his fingers. The fragment wants to return to its source. I am simply helping it along. Morvath roared again from above, louder and more furious than before. The entire archive shook. Several stone shelves cracked under the vibration. Kaelor raised his sword and pointed it at Valen. Stop. Valen ignored him. His eyes remained fixed on Aurelia's hand as the red glow around his fingers grew stronger. The pain in Aurelia's scar intensified. She fell to one knee, breathing hard. Kaelor moved without hesitation. He lunged forward, sword aimed at Valen's chest. Valen finally reacted. He stepped back and raised his other hand. A wave of red energy burst from his palm, forcing Kaelor to block with his sword. The impact sent sparks flying across the archive. Orvik shouted at the guards, "Protect the king!" The guards rushed forward, but Valen was already moving toward Aurelia. His eyes were locked on the glowing scar on her palm. Aurelia tried to push herself up, but the pain made it difficult. She could feel the ash bond fragment inside her being pulled toward Valen, as if it recognized him as its new master. Just as Valen reached out to grab her wrist, a deep, thunderous voice rolled through the archive, not from above, but from somewhere deep within the stone itself. It was Morvath. And this time the dragon did not speak a name. He spoke a single furious command that shook the entire chamber. Mine. The word mine reverberated through the war archive like a physical force. The stone walls trembled and several shelves cracked under the pressure. The red glow around Valen's hand flickered and then shattered completely. Valen staggered back, clutching his wrist as if he had been burned. The arrogant calm on his face cracked for the first time. Aurelia gasped as the searing pain in her scar suddenly eased. The pulling sensation stopped. She looked down at her palm and saw that the broken clasp symbol was no longer glowing as violently as before. Instead, it pulsed with a steady, deep red light, the same color as Morvath's eyes. Kaelor quickly moved to her side and helped her stand. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Aurelia shook her head, though her breathing was still uneven. It stopped. Morvath stopped him. Valen straightened, his expression dark with fury. He glared up at the ceiling as if he could see the war dragon through the stone. "You dare interfere?" he hissed. "You are chained. You should not have this much power left." From deep within the fortress, Morvath's voice came again, slower and heavier this time, but no less powerful. "You took what was not yours to take. You will return it." Valen's face twisted with rage. "I spent years preparing for this. I will not be denied by a broken dragon and a dead man's wife. He turned his attention back to Aurelia. Raising both hands, he began chanting under his breath. Red runes appeared in the air around his fingers, spinning rapidly as he tried to re-establish the connection to the Ashbond fragment. Kaelor stepped in front of Aurelia, sword raised. Enough. He lunged forward, forcing Valen to break his concentration to defend himself. Their blades met with a sharp clash that echoed through the chamber. Valen was skilled, but Kaelor's strikes carried the full weight of his anger. While the two men fought, Orvek Thane suddenly moved. He shoved one of the guards aside and rushed toward the pedestal where the ancient book still lay open. His eyes were fixed on the pages, as if he intended to destroy or steal something from it. Aurelia saw him. She acted without thinking. Pushing past the pain in her hand, she ran toward the pedestal. Orvek reached for the book, but Aurelia slammed her scarred palm down on the open pages before he could touch it. The moment her skin made contact with the parchment, the Ashbond scar flared with intense light. A wave of red energy burst outward from the book, throwing Orvek backward. He crashed into one of the stone shelves, sending scrolls tumbling to the floor. Aurelia stared at her hand in shock. The symbol on her palm was glowing brighter than ever, and she could feel a strange connection forming between herself and the ancient records in the archive. Valen noticed what happened and snarled. "No, that knowledge is mine!" He tried to break away from Kaelor, but Kaelor drove him back with a powerful strike, forcing him away from both Aurelia and the book. From above, Morvath's voice came once more, clearer and closer than before. "The fragment was never yours to claim, Valen. It was always meant to return to its rightful bearer." Valen's eyes widened slightly. For the first time, genuine fear flickered across his face. Kaelor pressed his advantage, driving Valen toward the far wall of the archive. The man was breathing hard now, his earlier confidence gone. Aurelia remained by the pedestal, her hand still pressed against the open book. She could feel information flowing into her, not in words, but in flashes of memory that were not her own. She saw glimpses of the last dragon war, of her husband Soren standing before Morvath, and of a ritual performed by Kaelor's father. She pulled her hand away, overwhelmed. Kaelor glanced back at her briefly. "Aurelia?" "I saw something," she said, her voice unsteady. "Soren." He tried to return the fragment to Morvath, but Valen and Orvek stopped him. They killed him to keep the ash bond broken. Orvek, still on the floor, let out a bitter laugh. "And now you have brought it all back. Foolish girl." Before anyone could respond, Valen suddenly laughed, a low, unhinged sound. "You think you have won?" he said, wiping blood from his mouth. "You have no idea what you have awakened. The ash bond was never just about controlling one dragon." He looked directly at Kaelor. "It was about controlling all of them." Kaelor's expression darkened. "What are you talking about?" Valen's smile was cold. "Your father didn't just split Morvath's will. He created a method that could be used on every war dragon, and I know where the rest of the ritual is hidden." He raised his hand one last time. This time, instead of reaching for Aurelia, he slammed his palm against one of the glowing runes carved into the archive wall. The entire chamber shook violently. Cracks spread rapidly across the stone floor and walls. From somewhere deep below, the sound of breaking stone echoed upward. Valen looked at them with wild eyes. "If I cannot have the fragment, then no one will." He stepped back into a swirling red portal that had appeared behind him and disappeared. Kaelor cursed and turned to the guards. "Find him! Do not let him escape the fortress." As the guards rushed out, the shaking in the archive grew worse. Large pieces of stone began falling from the ceiling. Aurelia grabbed Kaelor's arm. "We have to get out of here." Kaelor looked at the ancient book on the pedestal, then at Aurelia. "We take it with us." He grabbed the heavy book and tucked it under one arm. Then he took Aurelia's hand, the one with the glowing scar, and pulled her toward the exit. Just as they reached the doorway, a massive section of the ceiling collapsed behind them. From far above, Morvath let out another roar, but this time it sounded less like anger and more like a warning. Something much larger than Valen had just been unleashed. The war archive was collapsing. Large chunks of stone crashed down around Kaelor and Aurelia as they ran through the shaking corridors. Kaelor kept a firm grip on the ancient book with one hand and held Aurelia's wrist with the other, pulling her forward whenever she stumbled. Behind them, the red glow from the runes Valen had activated continued to spread like cracks in glass. Whatever he had done, it was not just destroying the archive, it was reaching deeper into the fortress. They burst out into a wider corridor just as a section of the ceiling behind them gave way completely. Kaelor stopped for a moment to catch his breath and looked at Aurelia. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her face was pale. The scar on her palm was still glowing faintly. "Valen," he said, "the ash bond could control all the war dragons." "If he succeeds?" "He won't," Kaelor said firmly. "Not while I still draw breath." They continued moving upward. As they climbed, the shaking gradually lessened, but a new sound began to rise from the depths of the fortress. The distant, powerful roar of multiple chains being strained at once. Morvath was not the only one reacting. When they finally reached the main level near the chain tower, they found chaos. Guards were running in different directions, and Lord Orvic Thane was being held back by two soldiers near the entrance of the tower. Kaelor approached him. "What is happening below?" Orvac looked exhausted. For once, there was no arrogance in his voice. Valen activated the old binding runes. He is trying to force every sealed dragon remnant to answer to him. If he succeeds, Morvath will not be the only one who wakes. Aurelia stepped forward. "Then we stop him." Orvec looked at her, then at the glowing scar on her hand. "You may be the only one who can," he said quietly. "The fragment inside you is resisting him. But if he reaches the central binding chamber, even that may not be enough." Kaelor turned to the guards. "Take Orvic with us. He knows the way." They moved quickly through the lower levels of the fortress. The further down they went, the more the air grew thick with old magic. Red runes flickered along the walls, and the sound of straining chains grew louder. Finally, they reached a large circular chamber deep beneath the fortress. In the center stood a massive stone pillar covered in glowing runes. Valen stood before it. Both hands pressed against the stone as red energy flowed from his body into the pillar. He turned when he heard them enter. His face was pale and strained, but his eyes burned with obsession. "You're too late," he said. "The binding is almost complete. Soon every war dragon will answer to me." Kaelor stepped forward, sword drawn. "Not while I live." Valen laughed bitterly. "You think this is about you? Your father started this. He broke the dragons because he was afraid of their power. I will finish what he began. But this time, the power will belong to someone strong enough to wield it." Aurelia moved to stand beside Kaelor. She raised her scarred hand. "You killed my husband for this," she said. "You will not take anything else from me." She pressed her palm against the stone pillar. The moment her skin made contact, the ash bond scar flared with brilliant red light. A powerful wave of energy burst outward, clashing directly with the red runes Valen had activated. Valen screamed as the energy recoiled against him. He was thrown backwards, slamming into the wall. The pillar shook violently. Cracks spread across its surface as the ancient magic fought between two opposing forces, Valen's ambition and the fragment of Morvath's will that Aurelia carried. Kaelor did not waste the opening. He charged forward and drove his sword through Valen's shoulder, pinning him against the wall. Valen gasped in pain, blood staining his robes. Kaelor leaned in close. This ends now. From deep within the fortress, Morvath's voice echoed one final time, not in rage, but with something closer to relief. The oath is whole again. The red light in the pillar suddenly collapsed inward. The runes on the walls flickered and died. The shaking stopped. Valen's body went limp. His eyes lost focus as the connection he had tried to force was violently severed. Kaelor pulled his sword free and let Valen's body fall to the ground. Aurelia slowly removed her hand from the pillar. The scar on her palm was no longer glowing. Instead, it had settled into a faint, silver-white line, no longer burning, but permanently marked. She looked at Kaelor. "It's over, isn't it?" Kaelor sheathed his sword and stepped closer to her. For the first time since she had met him, his expression was no longer guarded. "Not completely," he said. "But the worst of it is," he reached out and gently took her scarred hand in his. "Your husband tried to return what was stolen. You finished what he started." Aurelia looked down at their joined hands. "I never wanted any of this," she said quietly. "I only wanted to survive." Kaelor's voice was low but steady. "You did more than survive. You reminded a dragon of who he once was. And you reminded me that some oaths are worth breaking." He looked around the chamber, then back at her. "Stay," he said. "Not as tribute, not as a prisoner. Stay as someone the kingdom needs to see. Someone who refused to let the past stay buried." Aurelia met his eyes. There was no rush in his words, no demand. Only a quiet, hard-earned offer. She nodded once. "I will stay." High above them in the chain tower, Morvath let out a long, low sound. Not a roar this time, but something closer to a sigh. The remaining chains around him loosened slightly, though they did not break completely. For the first time in many years, the war dragon closed his eyes and rested. Months later, the fortress had begun to change. The chain tower was no longer sealed in darkness. Morvath remained within, but the door stayed open, and he often spoke with Kaelor and Aurelia when they visited. The Ashbond fragment had settled within Aurelia, no longer a source of pain, but a quiet connection to the dragon above. Lord Orvik Thane was imprisoned, his knowledge of the old pacts used to help dismantle the worst of the old laws. Valen's body was never found. Some said he had escaped through the collapsing archive. Others believed Morvath had taken him in the chaos. No one truly knew. Aurelia stood on the balcony of the highest tower one evening, looking out over the mountains. The scar on her palm had faded to a thin silver line. She no longer hid it. Kaelor stepped out behind her and placed a cloak over her shoulders against the cold wind. "You're quiet tonight," he said. Aurelia leaned back against him slightly. "I was thinking about Soren," she said. "He died trying to do the right thing. I used to think that made him foolish." She looked down at her hand. "Now I understand why he did it." Kaelor wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin lightly on her shoulder. "He would be proud of you." Aurelia closed her eyes. "I hope so." Below them, in the courtyard, the people of the fortress moved freely. No more secret tributes, no more sealed archives. The old fear was slowly giving way to something new, cautious, but real. Kaelor spoke again, his voice quiet against her ear. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Aurelia turned in his arms and looked up at him. The man who had once sentenced her to judgment now looked at her with something far deeper than protection. She smiled faintly. Together. High above, Morvath shifted in his tower. The last of the heavy chains had been removed weeks ago. He no longer needed them. The war dragon spread his wings for the first time in over a decade, stretching them toward the night sky. He did not fly. Not yet. But he could. And for the first time since the last war, the Dragon King and the Ash Bond Bearer stood side by side, not as ruler and tribute, but as two people who had chosen each other through fire, blood, and truth. The old pact was broken. A new one had begun,